If you're gonna fall, kid, at least make it look like a dance." The words slipped from Benji Carter's mouth like a joke rehearsed in front of a mirror loud enough to echo across the marble hallway of Halston Academy, sharp enough to slice through the morning air. Luca Easton didn't move. He lay sprawled on the floor, his lunch scattered in every direction. A peanut butter sandwich split open beside one sneaker. An apple rolled beneath the trophy case. Milk slowly pooled from a cracked thermos, seeping into the cracks of the stone tiles like it belonged there more than he did. At the edge of the scene, Gabe Easton froze mid-swipe of his industrial mop. His son had slipped on the very puddle he hadn't finished cleaning a patch of forgotten wax left behind by a rushing morning. "Kids just doing what janitors do," Benji added with a smirk. "Cleaning," with his face. A few parents nearby turned their heads. Most didn't. The hallway moved on. Gabe set the mop aside and walked brisk silent toward Luca. The boy was already sitting up, brushing sandwich crumbs from his sleeves. "I'm fine," Luca mumbled. "I know," Gabe said softly, kneeling beside him. He offered no apologies, no excuses. Just helped gather the scattered remains of his son's dignity without fanfare. That's when she walked in. Victoria Wren, CEO of Vestra Tech Heels, clicking like a metronome of perfection down the center of the corridor. Her cream blazer caught the sunlight. Her gaze was set like steel, focused, detached, calculating. Then she saw them. The janitor kneeling on the floor. The boy beside him, cheeks flushed. The broken sandwich, the apple rolling, and Benji Carter laughing with his entourage, a Gucci backpack swinging off one shoulder. Victoria didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence pressed down harder than any insult. Gabe looked up, eyes locking with hers for the briefest moment. "He's all right," Gabe said quietly. Her head tilted just a hair. There was no judgment in her expression, but there was no kindness either. Just pause. And then he should watch where he's going. She turned and walked toward the auditorium without waiting for a response. Luca exhaled slowly. She saw. "She sees everything," Gabe murmured. "That's her job." 20 minutes later, Gabe stood in the wings of the school's theater mop swapped for a dustpan, watching Ella Wren, the same woman's daughter, rehearse under the sharp spotlight. She was perfect, almost. Her posture, her lines, her hair, tied back in a ribbon that looked like it had been steamed before she arrived. But there was something off, in the rhythm, in her eyes, a hesitation buried deep behind every practiced movement. "She's supposed to feel the lines," Miss Henderson whispered to another teacher, "not just say them." Gabe pretended not to listen. A soft shuffle echoed behind him. Luca had snuck in sketchbook tucked under his arm. He didn't speak, just sat in the back row and began to draw. Gabe glanced over his shoulder. The boy's pencil moved with quiet intensity, tracing a scene that only existed in his mind. On the stage, Ella paused, midline, eyes darting toward the empty seats. Her voice faltered for a heartbeat before she forced herself forward. From the hallway, Victoria Wren's voice cut through. "Again, Ella, hit the second beat properly. You're rushing the pause." It wasn't loud, but it landed like a hammer. Miss Henderson smiled tight. "We're working on emotional connection today. No one will feel anything," Victoria said flatly, "if the delivery is uneven. Precision first. Feeling comes later." Gabe turned back to his broom. Later that afternoon, Gabe waited outside the nurse's office with Luca. The boy had scraped his elbow during PE. Nothing serious, just another story he wouldn't tell. The hallway was quiet, save for the ticking of the oversized clock above the trophy case. Victoria turned the corner. She wasn't rushing. She never rushed. Even her urgency had rhythm. She looked at Gabe, then at Luca's elbow wrapped in gauze and dried blood. "He fell?" she asked. Gabe nodded. "Gym class. It happens." She hesitated, something rare, then said, "Your boy. He watches the stage." Gabe tilted his head just a little. "He watches everything." Victoria crossed her arms. "Is he in the play?" Gabe smiled faintly. "No, not his kind of stage." Something shifted in her expression barely. Maybe a flicker of curiosity. Maybe just a shadow. I saw the sketchbook, she said. Gabe's smile faded. He draws when he doesn't want to speak. Smart kid, she replied, knows when words aren't enough. She held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into a meeting room. That night, Luca slipped a folded piece of paper into a tattered copy of the school playbook left unattended on the rehearsal bench. It wasn't signed. Just a simple pencil sketch, a girl standing in the center of a blinding stage light too bright for her eyes while a small figure sat quietly beside her in the shadows, hand outstretched. On the bottom corner, in shaky cursive, you don't have to shine alone, to. Did someone draw this, Ella? Wren stared down at the crumpled paper she found tucked inside her script binder. It wasn't from the director, it wasn't from her mom, and it definitely wasn't part of the stage notes. The sketch was simple but vivid, done in soft pencil lines, delicate yet precise. A girl stood frozen under a beam of stage light. Her hands were clenched, her knees locked, her eyes wide with fear, but off to the side in the shadows a second figure sat quietly. No words, no spotlight, just presence. Calm, steady. At the bottom of the page, scribbled like a whisper, "You don't have to shine alone." Ella's breath caught. Her fingers curled tightly around the edges of the sketch. For a long moment she didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. She held on to that drawing all through rehearsal. Miss Henderson ran lines with the cast. The stage lights glared down from above, hot and blinding. But today, Ella didn't flinch when they hit her face. Today, she wasn't thinking about the buzzing in her ears. She wasn't counting how many times she might mess up. She was thinking about that shadow figure in the sketch who didn't need to talk, didn't need to act, just stayed. And for the first time since her dad's funeral, she felt something unexplainable. Not strong, not fearless, just seen. Behind the curtain, Luca sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook open, head down. His pencil moved in silence, tracing something new, shapes, faces, emotions he didn't know how to name. The stage was his window, but he never wanted to stand on it. He just wanted to understand what people looked like when they were trying not to fall apart. Gabe stood nearby, sweeping the backstage floor. Quiet as always, but his eyes kept drifting toward his son. "You drawin' feelings again?" he asked gently. Luca didn't look up. She looked like she needed one. What someone to sit with. Gabe nodded slowly. That's usually harder to find than applause. After rehearsal, Victoria was already waiting outside the auditorium. She stood tall, arms folded, watching the students stream past. Most of them didn't greet her. They didn't need to. Her presence was the kind that reshaped the temperature of a room. Ella walked toward her holding the sketch in both hands. Victoria spotted it instantly. "What's that?" Ella hesitated. "Someone left it for me." Her mother took the paper without asking. She examined it, her brow furrowed not because it wasn't beautiful. It was, painfully so. It was the words that unsettled her. "You don't have to shine alone." Victoria's voice was low. "Is this supposed to be encouraging?" Ella blinked. "I think so." Victoria paused, then handed it back. "Let's focus on the script, Ella. You don't need distractions before opening night." "It didn't distract me," Ella said softly. Victoria didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on the sketch longer than necessary. The next morning, Miss Henderson found Gabe outside the prop room fixing a broken hinge on one of the storage cabinets. "Mr. Easton," she said, crouching to his level, "do you have a minute?" Gabe looked up, surprised. "Sure." "Everything all right?" She smiled. "More than all right, actually. I think your boy might be the best silent storyteller this school's ever seen." Gabe's expression didn't shift, but something in his shoulders softened. "You saw the sketch. I saw Ella hold on to it like it was a life jacket." She leaned closer. "That drawing reached her in a way none of us could." Gabe glanced toward the hallway where Luca was sitting alone, his sketchbook open in his lap, his pencil dancing in quiet rhythm. "He doesn't say much," Gabe said. Sometimes, Miss Henderson replied, the loudest things don't make a sound. Later that day, during set building, Luca offered to help move the cardboard castle centerpiece. The other kids hesitated, some still laughed behind his back, but he carried the structure with steady hands. Ella watched from the sidelines. After a while, she walked over. "Did you leave the sketch?" she asked. Luca didn't answer right away. He set the castle down carefully, aligning its edge to the taped mark on the floor. Then he looked at her and shrugged. "I just saw you looked stuck." Ella stared at him. How did you know Luca's voice was barely above a whisper? "Because I've been there." There was no pity in his tone, no awkwardness, just recognition. Ella nodded once. "Thanks for staying." He blinked. "Where else would I go?" That evening, Victoria stood in the back of the rehearsal hall, arms crossed, watching her daughter read through lines more confidently than she ever had before. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. When rehearsal ended, she approached Miss Henderson. "She's improving," Victoria noted. "She's connecting the teacher corrected. There's a difference." Victoria's brows narrowed. To what Miss Henderson smiled. "Not what? Who?" She turned, slightly gesturing toward the janitor sweeping the side aisle and the boy who trailed behind him, sketchbook in hand. "That boy?" Victoria asked. "Yes. She's been spending time with him. Not much, just enough." Victoria stood silent for a long beat, then said, "He seems withdrawn. He's present," Miss Henderson said simply. "And sometimes that's all a person really needs." Victoria didn't reply, but as she left, she looked over her shoulder once more. Her gaze rested not on her daughter, not on the stage, but on Gabe, his head down, his movements methodical, humble. Something pulled inside her, a quiet tug, the kind that didn't make sense yet. That night, Ella sat at her desk at home looking at the sketch again. She taped it inside her binder just behind the cover page. Not to hide it, but to keep it close. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment, Gabe placed a grilled cheese on Luca's plate and sat across from him. "Big day, huh?" he asked. Luca nodded, mouth full. "You do something kind for someone?" Luca paused. "I just didn't want her to feel like I did." Gabe studied his son, a quiet pride in his eyes. "Then you're already doing better than most adults, I know," he said. Luca looked up and smiled. "What's the janitor's kid doing backstage again?" Benji's voice cracked across the rehearsal space like a whip, loud enough for everyone to hear, but directed just soft enough to sound like a joke. Luca didn't react. He rarely did. He simply carried the last prop bench into place, hands steady, shoulders square as if the words passed through him like wind through trees. But Ella heard it, and this time she turned. "Maybe helping," she said, her voice cool but clear so someone else doesn't have to do everything alone. Benji blinked. His smirk faltered. A few of the kids nearby exchanged glances, no one used to seeing Ella talk back, much less to him. He scoffed, grabbing his water bottle. "Right. Let me know when we start handing out trophies for holding up cardboard trees." Ella looked down at her script, heart pounding. That wasn't like her. But something about watching Luca quietly doing what needed to be done without asking, without needing praise, had changed something. Sometimes kindness didn't roar, it just stayed. From the shadows, Victoria Wren stood with her arms crossed observing. She had arrived earlier than usual, claiming she wanted to assess progress, but she hadn't said a word in over 10 minutes. Her eyes were locked not on the stage, but on the boy Benji had mocked and on the girl who had spoken up for him. Then her eyes shifted to Gabe standing behind the set wall, quietly sanding down a jagged corner on a prop table. His sleeves were rolled up. A pencil rested behind his ear. He was talking to no one, just working hands steady and movements purposeful. "Do you always fix things that aren't yours?" Victoria asked suddenly. Gabe didn't jump. He looked up slowly, then offered a faint smile. "Only if they're sharp enough to hurt someone." Victoria tilted her head, curious despite herself. "You could have told the director, and waited for 3 forms, a maintenance request, and a week of someone tripping over it?" Gabe shrugged. "Didn't seem efficient." She studied him a beat longer, then said, "You used to be a teacher, didn't you?" He hesitated. "Long time ago. What changed?" He met her gaze steady. "I stopped being the person people listened to, but I didn't stop caring." Victoria didn't reply, but when she walked away she glanced back once, and that once lingered longer than she meant it to. That afternoon, Ella found another sketch. It was folded neatly between pages 22 and 23 of her script where she had left off the night before. This one showed the same girl Hershey knew that now on stage again, but this time her eyes weren't wide with fear, they were closed. She wasn't standing. She was sitting cross-legged on the stage floor surrounded by tiny stars, some in her lap, some floating around her. There was no spotlight, just calm. At the bottom corner, "It's okay to rest in the middle of your story." Ella blinked back sudden warmth behind her eyes. Later, as rehearsal dismissed, she slipped out of the back door of the auditorium. Luca was there kneeling beside a stack of rolled backdrops. "You left another one," she said, holding up the sketch. Luca didn't deny it. He just nodded. Ella sat beside him. "You don't talk much," she said. "People don't always listen when I do." She looked at him thoughtful. "Maybe they're listening now," he shrugged. She hesitated, then asked, "Why do you draw me?" Luca answered without looking up. "Because I see you." Ella's voice dropped. "Even when I mess up." He finally looked at her, especially then. Meanwhile, inside the main office, Miss Henderson was meeting with the principal about logistics for opening night. Scripts, lights, safety plans. But as the conversation wrapped up, the principal said, "You know, some parents are asking why that janitor's kid is always around." Miss Henderson stiffened. "Luca Easton isn't just around. He's one of the most emotionally aware students I've ever seen." The principal chuckled. "I'm sure he's sweet, but—" "No," she cut in. "He's not sweet. He's brave. Brave enough to be kind when others aren't." The principal blinked, caught off guard. And frankly, she added, "I'd rather have 10 Lucas backstage than 10 kids trying to be seen." She stood and left without waiting for a reply. At home that night, Victoria watched Ella eat dinner in near silence. The sketch was folded beside her plate like a napkin. "You're quieter than usual," Victoria said. Ella shrugged. "You feeling all right?" "I'm thinking," Ella said carefully, about what Ella looked at her mother, uncertain if the question was real or routine. Then softly, about what it means to be brave. Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Brave is standing under pressure and not breaking." Ella looked down at the drawing. "Maybe brave is breaking," she whispered, and still showing up the next day. Victoria said nothing, but later that night as she cleared the table, she noticed the sketch again. She stared at the stars drawn on the girl's lap, then quietly slid the paper into her briefcase. The next morning, Gabe stopped by the teacher's lounge to drop off a repaired light fixture. Miss Henderson was there sipping coffee. "Your son," she said, "has the kind of presence I wish I could bottle in hand to every kid on this stage." Gabe gave a modest chuckle. "He gets that from his mom. She was an artist, more like a lightning rod. You always knew when she walked into the room." Miss Henderson smiled. "And now Luca walks into rooms like quiet thunder." Gabe nodded. "He doesn't need noise to be noticed." "Neither do you," she said. He met her eyes, surprised. She continued, "Victoria Wren's been watching you, not the kind of watching that judges, the kind that tries to understand." Gabe didn't answer, but he looked away slowly and for the first time in a long time didn't feel invisible. That afternoon, Benji cornered Luca by the supply closet. "What's your deal, huh? You think drawing sad little doodles makes you deep?" Luca didn't reply. Benji stepped closer. "You think just 'cause Ella talked to you, you're someone. Now?" Luca stared at him, then quietly said, "I was someone before she saw me. I'll still be someone after." Benji flinched. But before he could respond, Ella stepped into view, and without saying a word, she stood beside Luca. Just stood, and for once, Benji walked away first. 3 days before the performance. "You're fine, Ella. Stop shaking." Victoria Wren said it with her back turned, voice flat, fingers tapping across her laptop keyboard in perfect rhythm. Ella stood in the hallway just outside her mother's home office, arms hugging herself like armor feet glued to the hardwood floor. "I wasn't shaking," Ella whispered. Victoria didn't look up. "Then stop standing like something's wrong." Ella didn't respond. She didn't cry either. She just nodded, turned around and walked away as softly as possible, like every creak in the wood was a judgment she couldn't handle. Upstairs in her room, she closed the door, sat on her bed, and buried her face in the pillow. She had rehearsed the lines perfectly. She had practiced every cue, every step. But the spotlight still felt like a siren, and the silence between her cues felt like falling. Her chest tightened. No one was yelling. No one was hitting. But somehow, everything still hurt. She reached under her pillow and pulled out the folded sketch Luca had given her. It's okay to rest in the middle of your story. She traced her finger along the soft pencil lines, then curled up and let herself breathe. That same evening across town, Gabe and Luca sat on a cold wooden bench at Lincoln Park, their favorite spot. Part playground, part thinking space. The wind rustled the dry leaves around their feet, and in the distance, someone was playing a sad tune on a saxophone. Luca handed Gabe half of a peanut butter and banana sandwich, the kind Gabe always called Elvis style. Gabe took a bite, chewed for a few seconds, then asked, "You been drawing more stars?" Luca nodded. "Still for the girl. She doesn't panic when she has them," Luca said. Gabe looked over at his son. "How do you know that?" Luca shrugged. "Because I don't either." There was a pause, a long one. Then Gabe said quietly, "I used to panic too, but I wore a tie when I did it so no one noticed." Luca glanced at him curious. "I taught high school art, remember?" Gabe continued. 30 kids buzzing like bees, papers everywhere, and one day, I just couldn't breathe. "What happened?" "I froze," Gabe said, staring at the skyline. "Middle of class. Couldn't speak, couldn't move. Just stood there holding a paintbrush like it was a life raft." Luca whispered, "Did anyone help?" No one knew how Gabe answered. Back then, panic wasn't a word we used out loud. Another long silence. Then Luca asked, "Is that why you stopped teaching?" Gabe nodded. "That, and your mom. When she got sick, I needed to be somewhere quieter, somewhere I could just mop the floor and think." Luca looked down at his shoes. "You miss her." Gabe's voice dropped. "Every time I see you draw, I miss her, because you remind me of the part of her that never stopped creating even when everything else was falling apart." Luca didn't speak. He just scooted a little closer. That was enough. The next morning at Halston Academy, Victoria sat in her car in the school's parking lot for longer than necessary. She had an important investor meeting in 20 minutes, but her hands rested on the steering wheel without moving. She had watched Ella walk into the building, shoulders tense, ponytail a little off-center. Ella never wore her hair like that. It used to be bows, before the accident. Victoria exhaled and reached into her bag, pulling out the sketch she had tucked away the night before. The pencil lines were soft, but the message was sharp. "You don't have to shine alone." It kept echoing in her mind. She hated how much it stuck, because she had been alone for so long, even before the funeral, even before the hospital. She wasn't built for softness, she was built for control. It was all she had left. In the teacher's lounge, Miss Henderson handed Gabe a fresh cup of coffee. He didn't ask for it, but she always seemed to know when he needed one. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded. "Just tired. The kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep." She sat beside him. "I watched Ella yesterday. She's changing." Gabe sipped his coffee. "She's being seen." Miss Henderson smiled. "By your boy." Gabe shook his head, half laughing. "I still don't know how he does it. Doesn't even say much. Sometimes kids don't need speeches. They just need someone who's not afraid to sit beside them without fixing anything." Gabe looked at her. "You think that's what healing looks like?" She paused. "I think it's the first step." At lunchtime, Benji made another comment. It wasn't cruel this time, just loud enough to make people turn. "You two always hang out in the shadows, huh?" "That where the losers sit out." Luca didn't flinch. Ella didn't even look up from her sketchbook. She was drawing today stars again, but this time with roots like little galaxies growing out of the dirt. Benji scoffed. Whatever. But this time his voice didn't carry the same weight. A few students rolled their eyes. One girl walked away. Ella glanced at Luca. "You didn't even blink." He shrugged. "Shadows don't scare me. Why not?" "Because that's where stars are born." She smiled, small but real. You say things like that and just go back to drawing, like it's no big deal, because to me, Luca said it isn't. It's just truth. That night, Victoria stood in the kitchen heating up leftovers. Ella sat at the island poking at her plate. Without lifting her eyes, she asked, "Did you ever panic?" before Victoria paused. The microwave beeped. She opened the door but didn't take the food out once. In the hospital, when the doctor said the words no mother should ever hear. "We couldn't save him." "Yes," she said finally. "But I didn't call it that. I called it handling it." Ella whispered, "I don't think I'm handling it." Victoria turned. For the first time in what felt like years, she walked over and sat beside her daughter, not across, not above. Beside. She didn't offer advice, she didn't fix anything. She just placed a hand gently on Ella's shoulder and said, "Then let's not handle it alone." The sky was velvet black, stretched tight with silence. No stars tonight, just the dull hum of streetlights outside the Wren residence and the steady mechanical sweep of the sprinklers on the front lawn. Inside the house was dim, the air thick with the kind of quiet that made you feel like even your thoughts might echo. Ella sat cross-legged on the living room rug, a crumpled script in her lap. She wasn't reading it anymore, just holding it like it might shield her. The overhead light was off. She'd only turned on the small lamp in the corner, the one with the fabric shade that turned everything gold. Victoria walked in, tablet still in hand heels, clicking across hardwood. She stopped when she saw Ella on the floor. "You're supposed to be in bed." Ella looked up but didn't speak. Victoria exhaled through her nose. "Is this about tomorrow?" Ella nodded slowly, then added, barely above a whisper, "I can't do it." Victoria's jaw tightened. She hated those words, "I can't." They reminded her of hospital beds and heart monitors and men who made promises they couldn't keep. "You've rehearsed for weeks. You know your lines. That's not the part I'm scared of." "Then what?" Ella swallowed hard. What if I freeze again? What if I mess it all up in front of everyone?" Victoria set the tablet down on the coffee table, a soft clunk in the silence. She sat down across from her daughter, knees level with Ella's. "You won't freeze, but what if I do?" Victoria hesitated. She wanted to say something comforting, something motherly. But she'd always been better with numbers than nerves, with decisions than emotions. So she said flatly, "Then you keep going." Ella looked away. Victoria's voice softened, but only a little. "Ella, there's strength in standing up, but there's power in showing up even when you're scared. That's the kind of courage people remember." Ella blinked hard. "Do you remember people like that?" Victoria paused. Her voice cracked barely. "I remember one." Ella leaned in, whispering, "Who?" But Victoria didn't answer. She just reached over, brushed a loose strand of hair behind Ella's ear and said, "Try to get some rest." Later that night, Luca sat by his bedroom window, chin resting on his knees. The moon had come out faint and silver, just enough light to draw by. He sketched slowly, carefully. Not a face, not a stage, just a pair of small shoes, one facing forward, one turned sideways, and beside them a shadow. A boy sitting, not saving, not fixing, just staying. He folded the paper in half and wrote 5 words on the back: "If you can't stand, I'll sit." The next morning before school, he tucked the drawing inside the prop folder labeled Ella Wren, Act 2. He didn't sign it. He never did. At school, the air buzzed with excitement. Parents were already dropping off cupcakes, tissue paper flowers, glittery signs that read "Bravo" in all caps. The auditorium had been transformed overnight. Curtains, steamed lights, tested microphones, clipped and ready. Backstage, it was a different story. Ella stood in front of the mirror, pale and trembling. The costume fit perfectly soft blue satin with a silver sash, but she felt like she was wearing someone else's bravery. Luca approached quietly, holding the prop folder. "You left this." She nodded, eyes glassy. "Thanks." He hesitated, then added, "You're not alone, you know." Ella blinked. "What?" He looked down. "I mean, you don't have to be." She opened the folder, her fingers brushing the folded sketch inside, her hands stilled as she read the back. "If you can't stand, I'll sit." Her throat tightened. "How do you always know what to say?" she asked. "I don't," he said. "I just draw what I wish someone had said to me." There was a pause. Then Ella asked, "Were you ever scared to go on stage?" Luca nodded. "I was scared to even look at the stage. What changed?" He smiled softly. Someone stayed. That afternoon, Victoria sat in the audience near the front alone in a sea of excited parents. She wore her usual navy blue blazer, but her expression was different, softer around the eyes, less guarded. She'd caught a glimpse of Gabe earlier adjusting stage props with Miss Henderson. He hadn't seen her. Or maybe he had, but chose not to show it. She wasn't sure which stung more. As the house lights dimmed, her fingers gripped the program a little tighter. She whispered to herself, "Breathe, Ella. Just breathe." Backstage. Ella peeked out from behind the curtain. Her heart was pounding. Her hands were cold. She looked down at the sketch one last time, then turned to Luca. "If I mess up, I'll be there. But if I freeze..." He looked her straight in the eyes. "Then I'll sit next to you, and we'll freeze together." The stage manager called places. The house went silent. The curtain began to rise, and somewhere in the wings one boy stood ready, not with lines, not with applause, but with quiet courage. The kind that stays. The curtains parted like a breath being held too long. A hush swept through the auditorium, not the kind that welcomes a performance, but the kind that prepares for impact. Spotlights flared soft and golden, casting long shadows on the polished floor of the stage. Painted props stood tall like stiff paper trees, trembling slightly under the weight of expectation. Rows of parents leaned forward in their seats, camera phones lifted in unison. Ella stood dead center alone. Her small frame looked even smaller under the heat of the lights. The moment the glare hit her eyes, her breath caught. It was just like before. The silence wasn't comforting. It was deafening. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Lines she'd memorized 100 times dissolved. Her legs felt locked. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out the soft cue music starting from the orchestra pit. Then came the whispers. Not cruel, not mocking, but audible. "What's happening? Is this part of the play? Is she okay?" From the wings. Miss Henderson started to rise from her chair. Backstage, a boy's hand gripped the curtain. Luca. He didn't think. He just moved. He stepped out onto the stage, still in his faded hoodie and jeans. No costume, no spotlight, no script. Just him. Just presence. A murmur rippled through the audience. Victoria sat bolt upright. What is he? But Gabe, standing in the shadows of the wings, didn't move. His eyes never left his son. Luca walked slowly to center stage. Ella didn't look at him. She couldn't. Her eyes were still frozen forward like a deer caught in too many headlights. So he didn't speak. He didn't pull. He didn't push. He sat, right there beside her, cross-legged, hands in his lap, looking forward like it was the most natural thing in the world to do. Then softly he said, "You don't have to do anything. I'm just here." A full 10 seconds passed. Then 20. A few giggles from kids in the back. A few coughs from nervous adults. Then silence again. And in that silence, something shifted. Ella's chin lowered a fraction. She looked at him, just her eyes, just a glance, but it cracked something open. Luca didn't smile. He didn't speak again. He just stayed. And then, without cue or command, Ella took a shaky step forward. Then another. She turned to him. "Will you..." "Stay," he nodded once. She reached down, took his hand not tightly, not theatrically, just enough to know someone was real, and then turned to face the crowd, and spoke her first line. Her voice was a whisper, but it was there. "I once thought the forest had no voice." The line hovered in the air. Another followed. And another. Miss Henderson in the wings wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her cardigan. The lights dimmed slightly, shifting to follow Ella as she moved slowly, cautiously through the scene. Luca stayed seated silent like the moon at her back. When the scene ended, the lights faded to black. For a moment there was nothing. And then applause. Not polite, not restrained. Thunderous. Parents stood. Some clapped through tears. Others just whispered, "Did you see that boy? Who was he?" Ella took a step back toward Luca. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged. "You said the line." She nodded. "Because you stayed." They walked off stage together. No bow, no spotlight, just quiet. Backstage, chaos resumed. "Where's Miss Henderson Q for scene 2? Someone get that boy's name who let him up there." But in the middle of it all, Victoria stood motionless, staring at the empty stage. She didn't smile. She didn't move. She whispered something under her breath, but no one heard it. Except Gabe. He was now standing beside her, hands still dusty from moving set pieces. His voice was low, even. "That was my son." Victoria turned. Slowly. Studied his face in a way that felt different. "You let him walk on." Gabe shook his head. "I didn't let him. He knew she needed someone." There was a pause. Victoria looked back at the stage. He broke the scene. He saved it. Another beat of silence. Then she said almost to herself, "There's a kind of courage that doesn't raise its hand. It just walks forward." Gabe didn't reply. He didn't need to. That night, as the auditorium emptied and folding chairs echoed shut, the story began to ripple. A parent uploaded a shaky video to Facebook. Caption: "This boy sat down when she couldn't stand." "You need to see this." By morning it had a name, #the boy who stayed. There was no music, no curtain call, no script for what had just happened. Only silence, thick and shimmering, lingering in the air like the echo of something sacred. Luca stood beside Ella, still on stage, still hand in hand, both blinking into the darkened auditorium. He hadn't planned it. He hadn't even realized he was moving until his feet hit the light. But he stayed. And now as the house lights slowly rose and the sound of applause still rang in his ears, the boy who had never meant to be seen was the one no one could stop looking at. Backstage erupted. Parents were murmuring, students whispering, teachers fumbling through programs trying to figure out who the boy was. The spotlight might have dimmed, but all eyes were still following him as he walked off stage. Miss Henderson rushed forward. Her voice was soft, but her eyes were bright. "Luca," she said, kneeling, "do you know what you just did?" He looked down, shrugged. "I didn't want her to feel alone." From the wings, Gabe exhaled so quietly it didn't reach his chest. He was proud, but more than that, moved in a way that made him feel both small and full. Victoria Wren approached them, heels silent, on the polished stage floor. Her expression was unreadable, shoulders back, posture perfect, but something in her gaze, softer. She looked down at Luca. "No one gave you permission." Luca nodded. "I know. You broke the scene." "I didn't mean to," he said, but she couldn't breathe. There was no defense in his voice, no defiance, just the kind of clarity that doesn't ask for approval because it doesn't need it. Victoria blinked, and for the first time in years, she didn't reach for a judgment. She reached for silence. Gabe stepped forward, wiping his hands on the side of his pants. "If there's a problem," he said gently, "you can talk to me." Victoria turned to him. "He's your son." Gabe nodded, all heart and elbows. Miss Henderson laughed softly, then turned to Victoria. "You should have seen it from the front row." The moment he sat down, the whole room shifted. Ella had wandered back into the wings, watching quietly. She hadn't let go of Luca's drawing, now folded carefully in her hand. "I wasn't going to say the lines," she said suddenly. Her voice was small, but firm. "But when he sat, I remembered why I wanted to in the first place." Victoria knelt before her daughter. "You were brave." Ella shook her head. "He was brave. I just followed." Victoria looked at her for a long time. Then quietly, "Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that says nothing." Gabe caught that line, tucked it away. It was a strange thing to see a woman built of structure and success slowly surrender to silence. And in that silence, something else grew. The next morning, the school's group chat was on fire. By 9:00 a.m., a clip from the audience, a grainy, slightly tilted video, had already gone semi-viral on the local parent forums. The title under it read, "This boy sat down so she could stand." By noon, "Had the boy who stayed" was trending in educational hashtags. By night, a podcast had already reached out to Miss Henderson. "Do you think we could speak to the father?" they asked. His son? That was powerful. Gabe had no social media, no LinkedIn, he barely used email, but he had a voicemail blinking red when he got home, and it wasn't about the plumbing. Victoria sat at her dining room table that night, scrolling through comments. Strangers writing things like, "My daughter watched this 6 times. She said she wants a friend like him. I'm crying in my car. We need more boys like this." Ella sat across from her, a warm blanket around her shoulders. For once, no tablet, no screen, just her tracing a crayon over one of Luca's drawings. "It feels like breathing now," she said quietly. Victoria looked up. "What does the stage?" "The lights. It doesn't scare me anymore." Victoria nodded, but didn't speak. She felt it something uncoiling inside her, a slow loosening of the invisible rope she'd been holding tight since her husband's death. Let no one see the cracks she had taught herself, but that night she didn't need armor, just quiet, and the memory of a boy who simply stayed. Back at the Eastons' tiny apartment, Gabe poured 2 glasses of apple juice. He handed one to Luca, who was sitting cross-legged on the worn couch, still in yesterday's jeans. "You want to talk about it?" Gabe asked. Luca took a sip, shook his head. "I just didn't want her to fall." Gabe looked at his son. "You know, he said most people wait their whole lives to be noticed, to be clapped for, to be seen." Luca blinked at him. "I didn't even say anything." "Exactly," Gabe said. "And still somehow you said everything." They clinked their glasses not like a toast but like a promise. Across town, Miss Henderson stood alone on the empty stage. She'd stayed after cleanup, after the last parent had waved goodbye, after the janitors had finished their quiet sweep of the auditorium. She walked to center stage and looked out. She didn't say a word. She just smiled. Something had changed. Not just in Ella, not just in Luca, but in every adult who thought they understood bravery, because sometimes the truest courage is the boy who doesn't raise his hand, who doesn't take a bow, but simply stays. The curtain had long since dropped, but the real show was only just beginning. The auditorium buzzed in an awkward hum, a room unsure if it had witnessed something disruptive or divine. Parents whispered, teachers blinked. Phones had already captured the moment, but hearts were still trying to process it. At the center of it all stood Luca, his shoulders square but unsure, the stage lights behind him casting a soft halo on his tousled brown hair. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't proud, he was simply there, and that somehow made the moment more powerful. From the shadows, Principal Deming stormed down the aisle with the precision of someone who believed silence was dangerous. Who gave that child permission to interrupt the performance? He snapped, his voice echoing off the velvet curtains. Miss Henderson stepped between him and the boy like it was instinct. "No one," she said gently, and thank God for that. Deming's lips thinned. This wasn't in the program. It disrupted the flow, created liability. "It saved the scene," Miss Henderson countered. "He saved her." Victoria Wren emerged beside them like a ghost, poised, elegant, unreadable. Her voice was low, but carried weight. That child was braver than most adults tonight. The principal hesitated. "He's not even part of the cast." Victoria turned toward him, eyes like polished steel. Maybe he should have been. Gabe moved toward the cluster now forming near the stage steps. He hadn't wanted to cause a stir. He never did. But when Victoria's gaze landed on him, he knew he could no longer stay in the back row. "That's my son," Gabe said quietly. Deming scoffed. "Janitor's son has no business walking on stage uninvited." The moment froze. Every teacher within earshot stiffened. A few students shrank back, unsure of the tension suddenly brewing. But Victoria didn't blink. She stepped forward, heels clicking against the polished floor, and faced Deming. "I didn't ask your permission to attend tonight," she said. "I didn't ask for a scene stealer or a headline moment. But that boy gave us both." She turned toward Gabe now, her voice softer, "And that man raised him." Deming opened his mouth to respond, but found no purchase. The power had shifted. Somewhere between Ella's trembling silence and Luca's quiet presence, the room had rearranged itself. Miss Henderson leaned in toward Gabe. "There's going to be a lot of questions," she murmured. "You okay, being seen now?" He glanced at Luca, then nodded. "I'd rather be seen than pretend this didn't matter." By the time they reached the school lobby, half the parents had already left, but one lingered, a woman in a windbreaker with a phone clutched in her hand like it held gold. "I hope you don't mind," she said sheepishly. "I filmed it, the part where he sat down, and she started speaking again. I posted it to the parent page." Gabe's heart dropped into his shoes. "Oh," he managed. The woman bit her lip. "I tagged it The Boy Who Stayed. Just a little thing. It already has over 100 shares." Luca blinked. "That's a lot." Victoria stepped beside them, folding her arms as she looked at the screen. "It's more than a lot," she said. "It's the kind of moment people replay when the world feels like it's falling apart." The woman grinned, then paused. "Do you mind if I keep it up?" Gabe looked down at Luca. "You okay with that?" Luca nodded, eyes wide. "Yeah, I guess. I stayed for her. Maybe someone else needs someone to stay too." By the time Gabe and Luca got home, the apartment felt smaller. Not physically, but when the world starts watching you, even the walls begin to lean in. Gabe stared at the voicemail light on their old landline. It blinked like it knew. He pressed play. A calm, polished voice filtered through. "Hi, this is Dr. Sheila Froman from the Everyday Bravery podcast. We came across a story tonight about a young boy who sat beside a classmate in crisis. We'd love to speak with his guardian if you're open to it. Call back any time." "Thank you." Luca sat on the couch holding the last drawing he'd given Ella. The crayon lines were smudged, but the meaning still shone through. "I didn't even have a line," he murmured. Gabe joined him. "You didn't need one." Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Wren sat at her kitchen table with a glass of untouched red wine. Ella was already in bed, curled under blankets with one of Luca's sketches on the nightstand beside her. Victoria stared at her phone, replaying the video someone had texted her. Luca walking in, sitting, no words, just being there. Her daughter breathing again. She didn't know how to name the ache in her chest. It wasn't pain, it wasn't joy, it was something messier, softer. She'd built her world on control, on deadlines, outlines, contingency plans. But this was a child with no script and another who forgot hers, saving each other in real time. Her fingers hovered over the call button. Then she put the phone down and walked barefoot to her daughter's room. She sat on the edge of the bed. Ella stirred. "Mom, I'm here," Victoria whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Ella's eyes blinked open. For the first time in years, Victoria didn't ask her daughter to be stronger. She simply stayed. Back at school the next morning, Miss Henderson pinned something to the bulletin board outside the auditorium. A photo printed from a phone screenshot. Luca sitting beside Ella. Stage lights glowing like a sunrise behind them. Beneath it, in hand-lettered script, were 5 simple words. "Sometimes staying is the bravest thing." It began, like most things now, with a shaky video and a quiet caption. By 7:42 a.m., the clip of Luca sitting beside Ella had climbed to 2,400 shares in a Facebook group for local parents. By 9:15, it crossed state lines. By noon, it had reached 1 million views. But numbers weren't what mattered. It was the comments. "My son has anxiety. This made me weep. He didn't fix her. He just stayed. That's the kind of friend I pray my daughter finds. Every school needs a Luca." Hashtag at the boy who stayed. Miss Henderson sat in the staff lounge, barely touching her tea. She scrolled through the comments with hands that trembled not from nerves but from something deeper, reverence. This wasn't viral because it was shocking. It was viral because it was true. The kind of truth people forget to believe in. Gabe didn't know what to say when the podcast team arrived. He tried to say no, politely, then firmly. But Luca had looked at him with those quiet, steady eyes and said, "Maybe it's not just her who needs someone to stay." So now, he sat in the school library facing 2 microphones and a woman named Marissa who spoke like she'd hugged 1,000 stories and still made room for one more. "You're Gabe Easton?" she asked, adjusting the audio levels. He nodded. You don't do interviews, I clean hallways, he said simply, not headlines. Marissa smiled. That's exactly why people want to hear from you. She turned on the recorder. Tell me about your son. Gabe paused, looked down at his hands. Then slowly, like peeling back layers of memory, he began. He's the kind of kid who notices when the vending machine's been unplugged too long, or when someone's blinking too fast because they're trying not to cry. Marissa's brow furrowed, touched. And that night? Did you know what he was going to do? No. Gabe chuckled, soft and proud. But I wasn't surprised. There was a pause. The air shifted. Why do you think it resonated with so many people? She asked. Gabe looked into the microphone like he was talking to someone on the other side of grief, of exhaustion, of silence. Because most of us, we're just waiting for someone to sit beside us when we can't speak. Click. The recorder stopped, but the echo would keep traveling. Victoria watched the interview on her laptop, elbows resting on her kitchen island. The way Gabe spoke, unpolished, unrehearsed, it didn't feel like a story being told. It felt like truth finding oxygen. Across the marble counter, Ella was coloring. Not a princess, not a unicorn, just two kids sitting on a stage. Ella paused and looked up. He doesn't like cameras. No, Victoria replied. He likes people. There was something unfamiliar in her voice, a gentleness. Ella squinted at the screen. He didn't smile much. Victoria shook her head. Some people don't need to smile to be kind. Ella went quiet. Then, he made me feel like I didn't have to try so hard to be okay. Victoria's throat tightened. There were 1,000 things she wanted to say. Things about grief and control, and the way fear wraps itself around love so tightly you sometimes forget which is which. But all she managed was me too. The next day at school, Luca walked into a hallway full of second glances and whispered awe. He wasn't used to being seen. Benji, the boy who once mocked him in the lobby, stood awkwardly near his locker. "Hey, Benji," said, rubbing the back of his neck. So, that was kinda cool. What you did." Luca tilted his head. "She's my friend." Benji nodded. "Still, I couldn't have done that. I mean, standing in front of all those people, I'd have thrown up." Luca shrugged. "I didn't think about them. I just thought about her." Benji paused. Then, quietly, like it hurt to say it, "Maybe you could teach me how not to freak out all the time." Luca smiled. "Maybe we can just sit together at lunch." It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't redemption, but it was something. Later that week, Victoria found herself standing outside the janitor's closet, a place she'd never voluntarily entered. The door creaked open. Gabe looked up surprised, but not startled. Ms. Wren. She stepped in crisp navy blazer in stark contrast to the industrial shelves and mop buckets around her. "I watched your interview," she said. He nodded. "Figured. It was honest. Only way I know how to speak." There was a pause. Not awkward, just real. Victoria inhaled. "You know, for someone trained to stay invisible, you've done a terrible job disappearing." He chuckled. "I blame my kid." They both smiled. She hesitated, then softened. "You told that podcast something I haven't stopped thinking about." He tilted his head. "That most of us are just waiting for someone to stay close us." He said nothing. Just let the words breathe. Victoria exhaled. "I never knew how to sit still. Not after losing him." Gabe looked at her then, not with pity, not with surprise, just understanding. "Maybe stillness doesn't mean stopping," he said. "Maybe it just means not running away." Their eyes held. No promises, no rush, just presence. And for the first time, Victoria didn't feel like she had to say more. That night, back at the Eastons' apartment, Luca taped a new drawing on the wall above their tiny kitchen table. It wasn't fancy, just two stick figures sitting side by side on an empty stage. No lines, no audience, just truth, just enough room for another chair. Gabe wasn't expecting to knock that early on a Saturday. He was still in sweatpants. A flannel shirt, half-buttoned, coffee only half poured when the door rattled twice and then stilled. He opened it to find Victoria standing there. No heels, no power suit, just jeans, sneakers, and a large flat box in her arms. "You redecorating?" he asked, blinking at the unfamiliar sight of her so human. "Not exactly," she said, stepping in. "I brought you something." Gabe raised a brow. "Unless it's a working dishwasher, I'm not sure I deserve gifts." She smiled wry but softer than usual. "You'll want to open it." He placed the box gently on the table, carefully peeled back the tape. Inside, a wooden case, a little battered, hinges worn. He unlatched it and froze. Paint tubes, dozens of them. Brushes still oiled and wrapped. A palette stained with old dreams. And beneath it all a folded canvas. Blank. For a second, Gabe forgot how to breathe. "These are mine," he murmured, fingers grazing the handle of a brush like it might vanish. Victoria nodded. They were in the district's old storage, labeled Retired Assets. One of the staff recognized your name on a label. Thought it might be a coincidence. His voice was quiet. "I thought I'd lost them." "You didn't lose them," she said gently. "You just left them behind." Silence filled the kitchen like warm fog. Not heavy, just honest. Gabe closed the case slowly, like tucking in an old friend. "Why bring this to me now?" Victoria leaned against the counter, folding her arms, not in defense, but in thought. "Because you remind me what healing looks like. Not perfect, not dramatic, just consistent." He blinked. "I've spent years trying to fix Ella with programs, routines, control." Her voice trembled just slightly. "But you gave her color, and silence, and a place to sit." Gabe met her eyes. "You gave her the courage to stand." Victoria shook her head. "No. You showed her what standing looked like." Their eyes held for a beat too long. Then she looked away. "Anyway, I thought maybe it was time you painted again." By late afternoon, the kitchen table had become a makeshift studio. The blank canvas sat between them like an invitation neither quite knew how to answer. "I haven't done this in years," Gabe said, squeezing a small amount of burnt sienna onto the palette. "Feels like cheating on my mop." Victoria chuckled. "I think your mop will survive." He dipped the brush. Just once. Then hovered over the canvas. And didn't paint. "You ever get scared to start?" he asked, not looking at her. "All the time," she said. "But the trick is realizing it's okay if the first stroke isn't perfect." Still, he didn't move. Victoria reached over, picked up a bright yellow tube, uncapped it. Without asking, she pressed a single dot of paint in the middle of the canvas with her finger. There she said, "Now it's not blank." Gabe laughed. "You just ruined the negative space." "No," she said. "I just gave you permission to mess up. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't banter. It was intimacy, the kind that doesn't ask. It just offers." Gabe finally touched the brush to the canvas, and the color bloomed. Outside, Luca and Ella sat on the stoop, a box of chalk between them. They weren't talking much, just drawing. A son with sunglasses, a dinosaur riding a skateboard, a stick figure girl blowing a bubble that turned into a rainbow. Ella paused. "Do you think grown-ups ever forget how to play?" Luca considered it. "I think sometimes they just forget they're allowed to." She nodded. "I think your dad remembers. He used to draw all the time," Luca said. "Before Mom got sick." Ella looked over soft. "Did it help?" Luca shrugged. "He never said, but sometimes." I'd hear him breathing different while he painted, like he remembered how to be happy. Ella traced a heart around one of the rainbows. "Maybe painting is like breathing for people who can't say how they feel." Luca smiled. Then my dad's finally breathing again. Back inside, the painting had taken shape. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. But it was alive. Bold strokes, messy joy. A swirl of yellow in the center where Victoria had started it all. She stood beside him now, watching quietly. "It's not finished," he said. "It's not supposed to be," she replied. "Neither are we." He looked at her, really looked, not as the CEO, not as the woman in heels and strategy meetings, just her, the one who stayed. She reached out and gently touched the edge of the canvas, careful not to smudge anything. "Paint without rules," she whispered. "That's what Ella said." I think she learned that from you. Gabe smiled. She learned it from someone brave enough to try again. A pause. Would you stay for dinner? He asked. Victoria blinked. Not a power play, not a move, just a simple ask. Yes, she said, but only if we use paper plates. I'm not letting you ruin your masterpiece washing dishes. He laughed. Deal. That night, 3 people sat around a tiny table. There were no speeches, no drama, just pasta laughter and 2 kids trading chalk drawings like currency, and on the wall behind them a still wet painting. Imperfect, unfinished, but bursting with color. There were no velvet curtains, no spotlight, no costumes waiting on coat racks. Just the hum of cheap ceiling fans, the scent of acrylic paint, and a line of mismatched folding chairs along the wall. But it was enough. In what used to be the unused staff lounge at Westbrook Elementary, a new kind of stage had quietly been born. There were paint-stained tables now, open sketch pads, plastic bins filled with markers, tissue paper, and broken crayons still good for smudging, and in the middle of it all, 2 kids side by side. Luca Easton's sleeves rolled a pencil behind his ear, and next to him a girl no one would recognize from the shaky video that once circled the internet under the name #The Boy Who Stayed. Ren was laughing. Not the polite kind that fades into silence. A real laugh, full-throated snorting at one point as she tried to balance a papier-mâché moon on her head. The little girl next to her, a first grader with selective mutism, giggled too, mimicking her. Ella didn't instruct. She didn't correct. She simply showed her how to be unafraid of looking silly. Across the room, Gabe was on his knees wiping paint from the floor. Again. Some things never change, he muttered, half-smiling as his rag smeared more color than it cleaned. Behind him, a voice. You said if I opened it, you'd mop the floor. Gabe turned. Victoria Wren stood in the doorway, arms crossed, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. I meant that metaphorically, he replied, standing and wiping his hands. She stepped inside, her heels replaced today by low, scuffed boots. Too late. I already put it in the donor newsletter. CEO and Janitor open art healing class for children. Has a nice ring to it. You're giving me top billing, no, she said dryly. But I figured CEO and Janitor was more viral than Janitor and CEO. Marketing, remember? They both laughed. The kind of laughter that fits like a coat you forgot still smells like home. The class was officially called The Room Without Stage. It wasn't in the schedule. It wasn't graded. But somehow, every Thursday after school, the room filled with kids who hadn't said a word in months, and kids who used to talk too much because no one listened. They painted emotions, acted out stories in silence, danced without music, and no one clapped when they finished. Because the point was never applause. It was presence. At the far end of the room, Benji, the same boy who once shoved Luca's tray to the floor, was gluing strips of orange construction paper into a flame shape. It's for my dad, he muttered when Miss Henderson passed by. He always said bonfires make him feel like he can start over. She didn't ask questions, just handed him another glue stick. Later that afternoon, as the kids cleaned up, Victoria and Gabe sat quietly on the floor near the back wall. There was no need to talk. Not yet. Not with so much being said around them without words. Finally, Victoria broke the silence. You think grown-ups can learn how to sit with each other too? Gabe looked at her. His eyes were warm but steady. As long as no one asks me to sing. She let out a soft laugh and leaned her shoulder just slightly toward him, not quite touching, but close enough. That's the thing about rooms like this, she said. You don't need to perform. You just show up. He nodded. That's the hardest part, isn't it? Victoria looked around at the kids. At Ella, helping a new girl clean her brushes. At Luca, quietly sharpening pencils for the next session. It used to be, she said. Not anymore. Outside, the sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the hallway tiles. The school was nearly empty. Ella tugged her mom's hand as they exited the room. Can Luca come over for dinner sometime? She asked. Victoria glanced back at Gabe. Maybe she said. then added with a knowing glance, "If he brings his mop." Gabe chuckled. "It's a package deal." Luca perked up. "Can we have tacos?" "Only if you don't paint the tortillas again," Gabe said with mock sternness. As they walked out together, no one said what happens now. There was no promise, no forced declaration. Only the quiet, sacred understanding between people who had once been strangers and chose to stay. Back inside the art room, the chairs were empty. The paint water was murky. The paper scraps were swept into a corner bin. But on the center table, left behind by small, hopeful hands, was a simple scene drawn in crayon. Two figures sitting side by side on a blank stage. No audience, no script, no spotlight, just presence. And a small caption written in a child's handwriting. Sometimes the bravest thing is not to perform, but to take a seat next to someone until they can. And sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do for someone is simply to stay. Not to fix, not to explain, but to sit beside them in the quiet until their voice is ready to return. Now, we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let us know. Which moment in this story touched your heart the most? If this story moved you, if it reminded you that healing can begin in silence, then please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. We share stories like this every week. Stories of quiet strength, unseen heroes, and love that shows up without fanfare. Thank you for spending this time with us. From our hearts to yours, we're so grateful you stayed.